speed, John Glenn.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
2, 1, 0, 0.
Liftoff. American return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, Roger. Go for deploy.
Thanks to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
This is Mission Control Houston. Hello and welcome. You are joining us live here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room to cover the hatch closing procedures of the Starliner spacecraft. It's been a busy almost 4 days docked to the International Space Station, Rebecca, and we're really just seeing the beginning of the end of this mission.
Yeah, so we've been in here all morning, and it's been really neat to see the International Space Station astronauts floating in and out of the Starliner capsule. They have reported that it's been easy to maneuver inside the Starliner spacecraft and that cargo was easily accessible to get in and out. Another flight test objective achieved, and one that can only really fully be confirmed on orbit. And so, they're closing out things inside the Starliner and getting ready for that hatch closure
That's right.
activity.
So we'll be following live, and you're getting those live views now inside the Starliner spacecraft. You see in the front there, Rosie the Rocketeer. It's Bob Hines and Kjell Lindgren. Lindgren you see in the background there, working on the closeout duties. We'll be seeing the hatch right at his feet. If you see that open area, that leads up to the International Space Station. Today we'll be covering the closing of that particular hatch.
We're looking at a live view out the Starliner's window there. You can see the International Space Station and the SpaceX Crew Dragon.
These views are part of an internal video system called Mustang. There are 4 cameras inside the Starliner spacecraft. We were seeing a couple of them as we continued to cover the hatch closure operations of the Starliner spacecraft. That view, one of several inside the Starliner spacecraft that has the beautiful view outside of the spacecraft looking towards Earth, and of course in this particular view, the International Space Station. Now, the Starliner spacecraft has, again, been docked for almost 4 days since attaching itself to the International Space Station at 7:28 p.m. Central Time on Friday the 20th. Of course, there were a number of flight test objectives that were accomplished on the ride to the International Space Station, but since it's been docked for almost 4 days, there have been a number of activities that the crew and the teams here on the ground in Mission Control Houston, both here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room as well as the Starliner Flight Control Room right down the hall here in Houston. They've been going through a number of flight test objectives. So you can see one of them.
Go ahead, Farmer.
So the couple of computers are rebooting right now. I'm back in the lab. 3.3.8 is the step I'm on for calibrating with 16. When I press O and 3, I don't get any calibration lines. I went O and 2, and I get a set of calibration lines, but I can't quite tell if they're the right ones for this width.
Checking.
And Pharma, we really appreciate your patience. Every time we do this, we learn something new, and this is no exception.
No problem. I'm learning too. And just so you know, some of the confusion on my end is still because when I hit O and the menu pops up, I'm only getting one line, and then I get half of the 2, and I don't see anything below that for the overlay selections. So I can't even tell what the rest of the menu is.
Copy. Thanks for that insight.
There you go.
And Farmer, when you hit O2, the lines that did come up, we think are the right ones. So go ahead with calibration based on those.
Okay, copy. The reason I ask, I think I have it lined up pretty well right now. The only thing that created a question mark in my mind is where the connector is in the bottom right. That's inside the arc or the circle. It doesn't really align, or it doesn't really match that connector. But the arc is lined up with the outside of the IDA, and so I think that part is accurate. The other thing, I'm just not sure if that's lining up, if that's supposed to be the part that it lines up with or not.
Farmer, we think it looks good to us, and you can move on.
Okay, copy. Sounds good.
The exchange you're hearing.
Lower outboard is calibrated, and I think that one is in good shape.
Copy.
The exchange you're hearing on the International Space Station with the teams here in the International Space Station.
C-12, however, the WIS 17 view is frozen with the red border around it, with no active video displaying.
And Farmer, that is expected since you're about to do that same work over in the cupola.
Copy all.
The exchange you're hearing through the space-to-ground loops from the International Space Station, you heard Bob Hines.
Go ahead on to NPRV.
This is the first time I've seen this piece of equipment. I pulled 3 pins and pulled them out of their grooves to unlock the cage, so the NPRV cage now moves up and down. I'm looking at step 2.3, pull center pin to loosen, and I see underneath the center circle of this cage that there is looks like a knurled pin. On it, it says pull to deploy cover. I'm assuming that is the pin that I should be pulling on.
Negative, Kjell. You want to leave that pin you just described to us, leave it in.
Okay, NPRV cap, then step 2.3, second line, NPRV cap, pull center pin to loosen.
And so, Kjell, we're talking in hindsight here, hearing words on the ground. You may have had your hand on the right pin. So it's the cap that's underneath the locking device. We're pulling that center pin to loosen the cap. And
yeah, that's the knurled pin that I was describing that says pull to deploy cover.
Okay, that's correct in that case. So the big picture here is we're going to pull that pin to loosen it. This will burp the NPRV device, basically like a little pressure burp, and then we push to reseat the cap as the third step. Does that make sense?
done that. Yeah, so pulling that pin basically releases the cap, and then as I push it back down, I feel it seat back in. Cap is secure, and the cage will remain loose.
And that is a good description, good config. Thanks.
The exchange you were hearing was about the NPRV, and that is the negative pressure relief valve. That is actually locked on ascent to protect against an abort into the water. It will be unlocked for entry since an abort into water is less likely.
And that comes from Kjell Lindgren, who you see working inside the Starliner spacecraft. He's not the only one, though, preparing the Starliner for its departure tomorrow on the other side of the space station, working on a tool called the RPOP. That's the Rendezvous Proximity Operations Panel. This is a software that's used for monitoring the Starliner's undocking and retreat from the International Space Station, which will, of course, occur tomorrow. Some of the conversation you heard prior to this was with NASA astronaut Bob Hines, setting up that tool and configuring it for when they gear up for monitoring Starliners backing away from the International Space Station tomorrow. Now, of course, what we're covering here today, you're seeing live views from aboard the International Space Station. We're covering the hatch closure activities. There are 3 hatches that separate the inside of the International Space Station from the Starliner spacecraft. There's the Starliner's hatch, and then there's 2 hatches on the space station side, one called the A-Pass, and then the other one on the Node 2 forward port of Harmony, or Node 2 forward hatch of the node itself. What they're going to work through right now is closing that Starliner hatch and, of course, backing away to start depressurizing the vestibule in between the station hatches and the Starliner hatches. They've gone through a number of procedures to get to this point, and, of course, a number of test objectives. One of the things we'll see is this orange tube that you see. This is the venting system that brings station air to mix inside the Starliner spacecraft and introduce that station air into the spacecraft itself. That does a good job of relying on the station's systems to mix that air. Microgravity has a nasty ability to form pockets of carbon dioxide, so mixing the air from the International Space Station prevents those pockets from forming and reduces the need for Starliner to provide its own environmental control and life support systems to support the inside of the spacecraft. With the hatches open, they can rely on the space station itself. They'll pull that hose away before they actually close the hatch and check on some of the other various systems, but they've been going through a lot of flight test objectives and steps to get up to this point.
And from a Starliner hatch closure perspective, it's essentially hatch open, but in reverse. And so the astronauts will clean and inspect the intravehicular activity, or IVA hatch, before positioning it into place on the space station side. Could take a few minutes for that to settle into the right location before they actually close it. And then they'll crank the hatch about 1 1/4 of a turn, righty-tighty this time instead of lefty-loosey. They'll close the pressure knobs that they open prior to hatch opening and monitor the pressurization of the vehicle.
Now, as we follow along, watching Kjell Lindgren here inside the Starliner spacecraft get ready to close that hatch. This, of course, comes at the back end of nearly 4 days docked to the International Space Station. It'll spend another day docked. Closing the hatches today is doing so nice and early. Ahead of an uncrewed spacecraft. We see the hatch closure much closer to a spacecraft's departure when there's crew inside, but without crew we can do so much earlier. But there's been a lot of flight test objectives that have been demonstrated over these past couple of days. Now during the docked phase, we were able to verify some audio checks with the International Space Station, as well as the Starliner spacecraft. We were able to test the environment inside the Starliner spacecraft itself. And we were also able to test the connection, which was, of course, established shortly after docking through an umbilical connection with the International Space Station, and of course, many other objectives as well.
All those prime test objectives and then some, so many more. We were able to recharge the spacecraft's batteries from the station's power. We were able to get that VESTA, the vision-based electro-optical sensor and tracking assembly data, down to the ground through the ISS link. We were also able to evaluate the onboard tablets. They basically practice transferring files from the ground to the tablet through those ISS assets, updating the configuration, and those tablets really serve as a replacement to bulky paper flight manuals. It includes procedures, checklists, timelines, etc. So when we get to the crew flight test, the crew flight astronauts will be paying a lot of attention to those tablets for manual for procedures and checklists and timelines. We also were able to check out the Starliner service module batteries. And as we mentioned, cargo transfer to and from the International Space Station was completed.
We also demonstrated the Starliner spacecraft's certain modes throughout its docked phase. One mode was called Quiescent Mode. This is sort of a standby mode while the Starliner is attached to the International Space Station, just continuous monitoring, but really not a lot of active systems, a lot of those mostly on standby. And that mode is what is demonstrated for these long-duration missions. Of course, Starliner, the ultimate objective after this flight test demonstration and a future crewed flight test demonstration is for it to serve as a crew rotation vehicle, bringing astronauts to and from the International Space Station in 6-month increments. So they'll evaluate that quiescent mode, which will take up the majority of the 6 months that the Starliner itself is docked to the International Space Station.
For undocking, egress, and link check.
Go ahead, undo.
You just step into step 2.5.
Copy. Thanks for the update. We're ready. 2.5.
We're now in a handover of some of the video coming down from the International Space Station. You see the teams here in the International Space Station flight control teams. They're working through some of the procedures that'll wrap up the end of the astronauts' day here aboard the International Space Station, operating at Greenwich Mean Time. We're just shy of 1800 GMT. This is some of the last things that the crew will be doing today, is working through the operations to close the hatch to the Boeing Starliner. Now again, we're following along with some of the hatch closure procedures. Kjell Lindgren inside the Boeing Starliner getting ready to close the first of three hatches, that first one being the Starliner spacecraft, which will be the end of our coverage today. But it comes near the conclusion of the Orbital Flight Test-2 flight test, which of course launched at 6:54 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 19th from Cape Canaveral Space Force Center. Shortly after the rocket's ascent, the vehicle separated from the launch vehicle, the rocket itself, and performed an orbital insertion burn to begin the nearly, or more than, as it turned out, 24-hour journey to the International Space Station. Now, after the orbital insertion burn, there were a number of demonstrations that were performed in orbit. There were checkouts of the abort engines. There was attitude holds and control. There was demonstrations of the astronauts aboard the space station commanding holds. We saw a retreat from inside the keep-out sphere, understanding that the Starliner obeyed the rules that were programmed within the spacecraft itself. And then this, of course, came just before it pushed in for docking with the forward port of the International Space Station. What you're seeing here are recorded views from Friday, May 20th, as the Starliner spacecraft approached the International Space Station for the first time. You see the hatch cover is open, and what's called the NASA docking system at the forward end, that is the element, that circular element in the very center of the spacecraft from this view, attached itself to the International Space Station. It made its final approach from the 10-meter mark and pushed in for a docking. It made contact, and we had a confirmed soft capture of the Starliner spacecraft with the International Space Station at 7:28 p.m. Central Time, mating the two spacecrafts together, the Boeing Starliner and the International Space Station, for the first time in space. This, of course, what you're seeing is a time-lapsed or sped-up version of the very methodical and slow procedure that we saw during the docking operations on Friday. Now back to the live views inside the Starliner spacecraft.
What you're seeing here is a wide cabin view inside the Starliner spacecraft. That white cargo bags, or those white cargo bags, are actually NASA cargo bags, and then underneath them and around them are the Boeing blue cargo bags. At the top right of the screen, you can see that no max material again, and so the IVA hatch is still in its stored location as the astronauts continue their closeout actions.
What you're seeing in this view is what will take up the majority of the mass that OFT-2 will be returning with a desert landing or targeting White Sands Space Harbor over in New Mexico as the landing site. But of the 600 pounds of cargo that OFT-2, that this Boeing Starliner will be returning to Earth, about 400 pounds of that is what's called NORS tanks, nitrogen oxygen recharge system tanks. These provide nitrogen and oxygen in tanks which recharge the systems that supply the space station with breathable air. The air inside the International Space Station is a mix that you would see at sea level on Earth, a very healthy mix of nitrogen and oxygen, with, of course, the systems scrubbing dioxide or carbon dioxide as the astronauts continue to breathe. 3 of these tanks are loaded, as you see in the cargo bags right here. They're loaded, strapped in, and ready to go for the ride home to return back to planet Earth so that teams on the ground can refurbish them, refill them, and send them back up to the International Space Station.
Related to the NORS tanks, this wasn't something that Starliner was originally planned to bring home on the OFT-2 flight, but based on the needs of the International Space Station to bring those rechargeable tanks home, the Starliner and International Space Station teams worked together to understand how to bring them home safely, how to work on the mass properties and the center of gravity that Starliner needs on its return home, so it's nice to see those packed in nice and tight there. Another interesting fact is the ISS astronauts were working to bring out and pull back in cargo to the International Space Station. We had astronauts Sunny Williams and Mike Fink down here on the ground at Johnson Space Center rolling through a lot of those procedures as well in the Boeing mock-up trainer, which is in Building 5 out here where the astronauts get to train on Starliner.
And in fact, here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, sitting next to the Capcom today, who is Rob Hayhurst, is Sunny Williams. She's sitting at the console as the resident Boeing Starliner expert, who, as you mentioned, Rebecca, has been in the mock-up trainer, understands these operations, particularly with the hatch closure, can relay her expertise to the teams here in Mission Control Houston to, of course, be the voice up to the crew who are actually performing the operations in space.
Thanks, Joe. We copy you moving on to 2.6, and you can call us back if needed, but when you get down to 2.6.12, cabin temperature knob, it's in a good position from yesterday, so you shouldn't have to move the knob. We just wanted to make sure that the tape was still applied. Check the tape's still there.
Copy, Wilco.
This new view that we're seeing here as they're going through their procedures for closing the hatch of Starliner, it does look like Rosie's giving us a little wave there.
Very fitting farewell, as this will be the last interaction with the crew inside the International Space Station and Rosie the Rocketeer. Of course, we're heading towards closing that hatch that you see on the top left corner of your screen. Kjell Lindgren inside the vehicle now, working on the pressure control system panel on board the Boeing Starliner. One of several steps that's needed to officially close out the vehicle. One of them, of course, will be taking that orange duct that you see coming through the hatchway that's mixing space station air with Starliner air, removing that, of course, closing the hatch. And then what's called egressing or exiting the Starliner spacecraft, of course, before closing that hatch.
Not in view here, but already in his seat is our gravity indicator, Jebediah Kerman. He flew up on the Starliner spacecraft, went through ascent and docking right alongside Rosie. You can see him there in previous views. The reason you're not seeing him in the live view is his tether is already in place. They just have it a little bit lower near the leg rest for where seat 2 is. So kind of in between seat 1 and 2 below the line of cargo. And we'll see if they adjust him a bit before they exit the crew cabin. Part of the procedures that Kjell is going through now is just checking all of the positions of the switches inside the Starliner spacecraft. And those are the exact same things that crew members would be doing if they were the ones coming home on board the Starliner, just getting the vehicle ready to fly home. And there you see Kjell taking pictures of those switch positions, again, just to help ground controllers understand the configuration that the Starliner's in. And you can see Rosie there helping to hold his tablet.
With you in 2.7, Kjell, and we can confirm the NEAs are safe. Go to continue.
Coming into view now is NASA astronaut Bob Hines. You see coming through the hatch. Kjell Lindgren's still under the display and control panel of the Boeing Starliner. Hines was configuring the software that will be used tomorrow for monitoring the Dragon's or the Starliner's undocking and exit from the approach ellipsoid. That'll end the joint operations between Starliner and International Space Station control teams. These steps now that they're going through are some of the last before they exit the Starliner for the very last time, before closing the hatch and getting ready for that undock. Kjell Lindgren has been working on the pressure control system panel and is now ensuring that the NASA docking system is configured before they exit the vehicle, making sure all the right buttons are flicked there on the display panel. There are a couple of covers on some of those panel switches, so he'll remove some of those covers and stow them appropriately. That will be the last thing on his to-do list before they call down to the ground that all of their procedures their closeout procedures have been performed and they are ready to close the hatch. So they're working through their timeline now to make sure that those are in place. It looks like Lindgren is now removing those switch covers you see and stowing them in that bag. So he's on his last step before they're ready to configure for hatch closure.
Those protective switch covers will actually be stowed in one of the Boeing cargo bags on the return to flight. So one of the, mentioned the last things that they do, they will put that into place before closing the hatch.
2.9. EST 100 is configured for hatch closure.
Starliner Houston CST, we copy configured at 2.9, thanks. Just before you leave, we wanted to ask for a visual confirmation on the lighting situation. Can you confirm that all 5 cabin lights are on? We're not concerned with brightness, we just want to make sure that you see all 5 as ON right now.
Confirm all 5 cabin lights are ON on.
Copy that, thanks.
You hear Kjell talking to ground controllers there through Starliner's communication system, which was another flight test objective that the team had. They wanted to make sure that crews could communicate with the ground and other assets from inside Starliner while on orbit. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see Bob Hines there going ahead and stowing those position covers in one of the cargo bags.
Now you see above Lindgren's head, from the vantage point, the view really of Rosie the Rocketeer, there is a window that's on the Starliner spacecraft, and you're starting to see the views come of the interior of the Starliner spacecraft get a little bit brighter. This is as the International Space Station and the Starliner spacecraft pass into an orbital daytime. Right now, the International Space Station is 271 statute miles over the South Pacific Ocean, east off the coast of New Zealand.
And we are getting a little visual confirmation there that Jeb is in fact in the seat and will be returning home on Starliner. So if anyone's wondering, there's our visual confirmation.
Starliner Houston, it looked like in the video that, Kjell, you may have been trying to talk. We didn't hear anything, but go ahead.
I'm ready to step into part 2 of 4 for CST hatch close.
Copy, and we concur with you stepping into part 2. That'll be step 3.
Concur. It's been work.
Station Houston on 3 for Farmer. Hey, Farmer, the ground performed the step 4 for RPOP, so the only thing remaining is for you to perform the calibrations on for both cameras on both SSCs. We're fine if you want to delay that and continue to help out Kjell. We think we got plenty of time for you to do that.
Okay, I actually just came back into the cupola since we were daylight, and looks like we got good views for that, except for S1 lower outboard. The sun is glaring straight into the camera, so I should be able to get the other calibrations done, and we'll see what happens with that one.
Sounds good.
Here we're getting a live view of the exterior of the Starliner spacecraft while it's docked to the International Space Station. And earlier today, the Canada arm, a robotic arm, was used for a planned exterior inspection of the Starliner spacecraft. NASA and Boeing plan to do this inspection for this first flight test so that they could learn as much about the vehicle prior to the crew flight test and follow on long-duration flights as possible. And through that inspection, the Starliner's thermal protection system was cleared for re-entry.
That's right. It's worth noting that the International Space Station Mission Management Team, which includes NASA, the international partners, as well as Boeing, pulled a go for undocking and proceeding with a landing tomorrow. So we are tracking towards that for undocking tomorrow. These procedures come in a very timely manner of getting ready for the Starliner to depart. The weather looks good. Systems continue to be monitored and checked out, but we are targeting for tomorrow to undock, and we do have that go. And you see the intra-modular valve. That's the orange duct that was snaking its way inside the Boeing Starliner through the hatchway there. You see has been configured and removed from the Boeing Starliner. These are some of the final steps before we get to the hatch closure itself. A couple more steps ahead of when we actually see that hatch close, which, as a reminder, is a free-floating hatch. We'll see that come into view once they get to that. From this view of your screen, you can sort of make it out. It's that white circular object over to the sort of the bottom left of this particular view. But we are well on our way through the objectives here to get Starliner configured for hatch closure. And we'll be seeing this incrementally throughout our coverage of the Starliner's hatch closure sequences. You can see the space station right now is flying over the South Pacific Ocean. As we fly over the Earth, every 90 minutes, we lose communication with some of the tracking data and relay satellites that we have that provide that constant communication with the International Space Station and the Starliner. We're just in a handover between some of those satellites, and we'll be regaining views very shortly.
Starliner, IMV duct teardown is complete. Step 4.1.
And Starliner Houston, loud and clear, we copy duct teardown complete at 4.1. We are all here ready to continue, but first I have two deltas to pass to you for step 4. The first one is concerning step 4.4. It's going to call you on to tie downs. Of course, there's also bungees there that you placed So we also want you to remove those bungees. They're crew deploy items, and they can just go back to the ISS. I'll copy.
We'll take those bungees back to the ISS, and then a little bit earlier in the procedure, I do need to stow the handheld mic and the chip up.
Affirmative, concur with that. Next, wanted to talk to you about step 4.9. It's a little bit it is misleading as in the procedure. What we need you to do is make sure the handle is fully counterclockwise. So full counterclockwise to the unlatched position. And of note, this is not going to line up with the marking that says position handle here before closing the hatch. So it's not going to line up with that indication, but as long as it's fully counterclockwise, you'll be in a good config. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I recall those markings, understand.
Farmer with Gen 3.
To be full counterclockwise.
I think the cupola is set up. Everything is calibrated on all three
affirmative, good, read back, and with that, everyone here is ready, so you will go at step 4.1,
and lab
4.2.
check, I think the lab also was good to go. Let me know if I'm missing anything.
Copy, go in 4.2 for hatch closure.
Thank you so much, Farmer. No, we are tracking the same thing. We are all set up in both the lab and cupola.
Okay, great. I'll put a couple notes on the SSCs, making them no touch for next 24 hours or so.
That sounds great, Farmer. And also, if you get a chance, if you could turn on the Node 2 camera, we can watch the egress activities.
Okay, will do. On my way there now. Thanks.
So with that, Kjell Lindgren has worked through the steps to get us to this final sequence here, which is he's going to get ready for hatch closure. They've successfully checked out the Starliner systems, removed some of the switch covers. There was an orange duct providing station air mixing in with the cabin environment of the Boeing Starliner that has been removed. They're now going to work through the methodical steps to close the hatch itself. You heard a couple of what's called deltas or changes in some of those steps, including the positioning of the handles. We'll get confirmation once Kjell Lindgren has moved his way through all of the procedures to successfully close the Starliner's hatch. In the meantime, Hines is on the International Space Station side setting up a camera. We may get some views from the opposing end here. Of course, we've been getting some great views inside the Starliner spacecraft. We may soon be seeing the inside of the International Space Station.
Rosie the Rocketeer is returning to Earth in her spacesuit. You can see that here. This is called the Launch and Entry Suit. And Rosie is not outfitted with any sensors herself. We actually used her data ports to collect data from sensors that are placed along Boeing's Starliner seat pallet. It's basically the infrastructure that holds all of the crew seats in place. And the data from those sensors will be used to ensure all future crew members have a safe and enjoyable ride, particularly on landing, is what the teammates here on Starliner will be paying really close attention to. What are the loads like, and what is landing like for the crew members?
And Houston Station on 2, Node 2 camera is set up and pointed at the hatchway. Let me know if you're seeing video.
All right, Farmer, thank you for that. And big picture for you is you are free to go help out Kjell in whatever he needs to finish his activities. And then whenever you guys are done, we'll start the feedback conference. If it's a little late, that's just fine.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll jump in there and start helping Kjell. Thanks.
Now we're seeing coming through the hatchway NASA astronaut Bob Hines, while Kjell Lindgren has been inside the Starliner spacecraft, configuring the spacecraft itself for hatch closure. Bob Hines has been getting a tool that will be used tomorrow for monitoring the spacecraft's undocking and retreat from the International Space Station, heading towards a landing tomorrow late afternoon, early evening. With him being complete with some of those procedures, he'll now work with Lindgren to close out these activities of getting that hatch closed. Now this will be one of the last procedures for the duo for tonight, getting the hatch closed, and then they'll work to depressurize the vestibule. Once this hatch is closed, the station hatch will be closed, and they'll depressurize the volume in between those and let that sit overnight with no crew inside the Starliner spacecraft aside from Rosie and Jebediah. They can do some of these procedures a little bit earlier than we typically see for crewed missions. So let that sit overnight and then get ready for undocking operations tomorrow afternoon, U.S. time.
You can see here Bob Hines going through that final cargo bag. What they are actually in search of is some straps for the side hatch, as well as the IVA hatch.
For those tuning in, we're following along with the crew going through some of the final steps to get ready to close the hatch in front of the Boeing Starliner. There were a series of straps that were holding some of the hatches in place throughout its time docked to the International Space Station for nearly 4 days. You see the crew opening up one of the cargo bags and putting those straps into little baggies and stowing them away. They're working through these steps one by one, the two of them together inside the Boeing Starliner now is NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren peeking through the hatch there on the top. NASA astronaut Bob Hines working together to configure the hatch itself and get it ready to close. You can see one of the final steps there already underway. Kjell Lindgren removing the cover that has been protecting the hatch itself, revealing the hatch. It's called the IVA hatch. That's the one that goes in front of the Boeing Starliner. So they're nearing the hatch closure very soon here. One of the final steps there, removing the hatch cover itself, and of course folding it and stowing it away.
Station Houston Space Ground 2 for Jessica at your convenience.
What's he on to?
Hey Jessica, prior to the Node 2 forward hatch closure activity, we need to direct somebody to get the deskant kits. We forgot to put it in the ASN for that activity. You can find the deskant kit 2 in Columbus /3 _ Echo 1 / Foxtrot 1 in 1.0 CTB 4080 labeled desiccant kits.
Okay, I copy. You need desiccant kits from the 1.0 CTB 4080 in Columbus /3 Echo 1 Foxtrot 1. How many kits do we need?
And that'll be just one kit, and there'll be four desiccant bags in there. Also, you're going to need to grab some 4 1-inch Velcro strips, and you can grab that from the office pantry in half CTB serial number 4222. That's in Node 1, Overhead 4, Charlie 1.
Okay, copy. We also need 4 1-inch pieces of Velcro from CTB 4222 and node 1 overhead for Charlie 1.
Good read.
The voice you're hearing is that of NASA astronaut Jessica Watkins. At the end of her work day, she just wrapped up some exercise and then started putting away some scientific samples. She'll now, you see her sort of floating in view, she'll now be collecting some of the hardware, including straps, to start thinking about a couple hatches from now. We're, of course, working on the IVA hatch, which is the name of the hatch on the Boeing Starliner. There are 2 more hatches. There's the A-pass hatch, which is close to Jessica Watkins' feet in this view, and then much closer to frame, the sort of square area, is the node 2 forward hatch. She's already preparing some of the equipment that she'll need to close that hatch prior to depressurizing the vestibule in between the Boeing Starliner and the International Space Station, working together as a team to get the hatch closed and depressurize the vestibule to get ready for Starliner's undocking and return to Earth tomorrow.
The depressurization of the vestibule actually helps the Starliner team to perform leak checks, very similar to the procedures that we went through when Starliner launched.
Floating goggles. It just entered into node 2 from the node 2 forward hatch. You got it, thanks.
You don't want to lose your goggles. The goggles being referenced were used prior to the hatch opening procedures. Of course, Starliner being a new vehicle and having limited insight into the cabin, since there were no crew aboard, those goggles were used just as a safety measure, a standard safety measure that's even used for cargo missions today.
And there we see Kjell taking additional closeout photos of that IVA hatch that'll be used to close the Starliner in just a few minutes. And even as we see the IVA hatch close to the cameras are protected by 3D printed covers.
Reminder that by design, the Boeing Starliner's hatch is a free-floating hatch. What we're seeing is 2 views, one from inside the Boeing Starliner, the cameras that are positioned in there, and then another camera view pointing down to what's called the pressurized mating adapter. And you can sort of see the 2 crew members, Kjell Lindgren and Bob Hines, working to get that hatch closed. We're now seeing down the pressurized mating adapter. You see some of the features of the NASA docking system on the Boeing Starliner side, as well as the international docking adapter. That is the adapter that allows the Boeing Starliner and commercial crew vehicles to dock to the International Space Station. This is an adapter that is affixed on the end of the pressurized mating adapter, which has been used for the past few decades for space shuttles to dock to the International Space Station. Now with the new generation of commercial spacecraft, that international docking adapter being used as an interface for the very first time for the Boeing Starliner. Hines making his way down the pressurized mating adapter now. Again, he is working with NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren to close the hatch to the Boeing Starliner.
What Kjell's doing there is actually inspecting the other side of the hatch before they put the hatch into place. Really important that they get a good seal. So they'll clean it. If they haven't already, they'll do some inspections, and it looks like maybe he's doing a fit check here. Also in view, you see the numbers 2 and 1. That is the NASA docking system on board the Starliner, built for NASA, and the whole purpose is to have common systems, common mechanisms, so that any two spacecraft can dock with each other in space. And so this is a really great test of that system before NASA uses it on deep space missions.
From this view, we're getting some spectacular insight into the design of the NASA docking system.
Starliner Houston on 2 for hatch closure, Cheller Farmer.
Go for Starliner.
Farmer, at step 4.8, we just wanted to confirm, double check that the hatch equalization valve 1, that cap is secured away from the valve, and we were going to offer up just using a piece of tape, any kind, doesn't matter what tape.
Okay, and you said on valve 1, right, is the one we're talking about?
Affirmative. HEV, hatch equalization valve 1.
Okay, copy, standby 1.
Really incredible views that we're getting inside the Starliner spacecraft with those Mustang interior cameras, 4 of them. We'll have them on board the crew flight test. Have been iterating on that system to hopefully get some near real-time or real-time views when we actually have crew on board and headed to the International Space Station.
And Houston Starliner, valve 1 cap is taped to the side of the valve, and valve 2 is the cap is being installed right now.
Copy. Good config on both. Thanks, Farmer.
Kjell maneuvering the IVA hatch into place, doing some fit checks. The hatch itself weighs about 100 pounds, so not heavy and certainly no weight in space, but just working through how to maneuver with it.
That's astronaut Bob Hines supporting the operations all along the way. Camera in hand, he'll be photographing the hatch for documentation purposes so the teams on the ground can analyze every step of the way. Of course, this hatch closure comes the day before undocking. The crew will continue to work throughout tonight after the hatch is securely shut. You can see Kjell maneuvering the latch now.
And through the window of the IVA hatch, you can kind of see a silhouette in there. Kjell will make 1 1/4 of a turn to get that hatch closed in nice and tight. And this is the first time astronauts are working with the IVA hatch on orbit. They have been able to practice here on the ground at training facilities at Johnson Space Center. But certainly working through these here on orbit is a little bit different and all about the process of how we'll do it when astronauts are on board on the other side.
Part of the procedure here is positioning the hatch in such a way so that they can turn the handle like you said, 1 1/4 turns. There are guides available on the station side of the hatch, 4 guides that allow them to monitor their position as they get it fully engaged.
Starliner Houston on 2 for Farmer Hatch when able.
Farmer.
Hey, Farmer, just following along in the video. The hatch itself, we're hearing, looks to be in a good config. What we were going to offer up is to try to make sure that the kicker dogs that are on the flat side of the hatch, and when you position the hatch, they need to be on the inside of the vehicle, inside of Starliner.
Okay, so from our side, they're on the interior side of the vehicle. So are you saying that maybe we're pulling the hatch closed too far?
Yeah, that is one way of thinking about it. Your first statement is correct. The kicker dog's on the inside, vehicle side of Starliner, and so potentially it has been pulled in too far. That's the first thing that we thought when we're looking at the video.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take a look at that.
Those kicker dogs that were discussed between ground controllers and the International Space Station crew members were something that we mentioned with hatch open, almost like built-in butter knives to get into the Starliner, open the hatch when this phenomenon known as the suction cup effect happens. So almost provide just a little bit of relief between the systems. So they just want to make sure those are in the right spot so that we can get a good latch. During a post-docking news conference, Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch described the behavior of the Starliner spacecraft and said that it was very patient and took everything in stride. And I think this is another opportunity to say that is definitely the behavior of the Starliner spacecraft as the teams are working through this hatch closure. Patient and learning as much as we can before astronauts fly on board.
All the more reason that this is a flight test. They write the procedures, they practice on the ground, they learn how to do it in space, and that can be applied. That can be applied for the next time when we have crew on board the Boeing Starliner. wait till it gets...
Houston Station, CST 100 IVA hatch is closed.
Starliner Houston, we copy. Starliner hatch closed. Thank you.
Station flight controllers have been watching along with us here on this video, and there was an audible woohoo when station's hatch was closed.
Very good. And that hatch closure time comes right at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Central Time. The International Space Station and Boeing Starliner with 262 statute miles over Belgium.
You can see them here talking about the process to close the hatch, so I'm sure our teams are going to be very interested to see how things went, how they can update the procedure so that we just get better every single time.
All right, with that, again, the Boeing Starliner's hatch is closed, 2 p.m. Central Time. Now, this is not the last thing that the crew members will do, though it will wrap up our coverage today. With that hatch closed, there are 2 more hatches that need to be closed on the station side. The first is the APAS hatch. You can sort of see it deeper down that tube, which is the pressurized mating adapter, right now covered with a white cover. That cover will be removed, and the station astronauts will close that hatch, as well as the hatch that will outline that square marker at the forward end of your screen. That's the Node 2 forward hatch. With all of those closed, they'll depressurize the vestibule in between the Boeing Starliner and the International Space Station, and perform some leak checks, all ahead of tomorrow's undocking. Before we wrap up our coverage today, we did want to make sure that you tuned in for our coverage of Starliner's undocking and return back to planet Earth. It all starts tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time, tomorrow, Wednesday the 25th, where we will start our coverage of the undocking sequence. Undocking right now is scheduled for 2:36 p.m. Eastern, 1:36 p.m. Central Time. Physical separation from the International Space Station. Shortly after they exit the approach ellipsoid, we'll break our coverage, and we will return later that evening at 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:45 p.m. Central Time to begin our coverage for the deorbit burn and entry through the Earth's atmosphere and return in the western United States. Right now, we're targeting the White Sands Space Harbor for our primary landing site. Weather is looking good for that primary landing site. That return, if you are following along and you are watching our coverage, if you're able to, if you're in the trajectory of that return, it's going to be an upwards trajectory. So if it'll pass over Baja, you might be able to catch a glimpse as it returns back to planet Earth. That touchdown time in the western United States in the desert is scheduled for 6:49 p.m. Eastern, 5:49 p.m. Central. If you're in Mountain Time, 4:49 p.m. So check out the trajectory, and you might be able to see a glimpse. The views of our coverage should be spectacular. But like I said, weather is looking good, and it'll be late afternoon, early evening coverage. We'll get some good daylight as we cover the landing sequence.
For Kjell Farmer and Timeline.
2.
HL, we're thinking we want you to, of course, continue with the APAS and Node 2 hatch closures, and likely that would go in the DPC timeframe, so you can skip the DPC, and then once you're done with the hatch closers, touch base with us, and then we can you can let us know if the feedback conference is still something that you can do with us, and we'll touch base at that time.
Copy all. I'll continue with hatch closures. Understand that I may miss DPC, and I think Farmer and I are good to do the feedback conference after DPC.
All right, we appreciate you still to do that.
Absolutely.
All right, you heard there that the station astronauts are going to push through the evening and continue with the procedures that we laid out. Again, 2 more hatches need to be closed. They'll depressurize the vestibule, check out the systems, and they'll have a conference with the ground to provide feedback about the whole process of getting the hatch closed and getting Starliner ready for departure before their daily planning conference to wrap up the day and get ready for bed. Again, tune in for our coverage tomorrow. And it does look like, Rebecca, that Rosie is waving goodbye, a very appropriate farewell for this evening.
Very fitting, and we look forward to seeing her on the ground.
With that, that'll wrap up our coverage of the hatch closure of the Boeing Starliner. Tune in for our coverage of undocking and return to Earth tomorrow, May 25th. This is Mission Control Houston.